something to happen. I write all these novels, and people are like, when's it going to start, you know? And but doesn't it really feel like in the last 2 to 3 weeks that the eclipse is likely a sign of warning of what's coming?
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and a warm welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, that voice was Chair Bell. I'll put a link to the clip that you've heard at the beginning of this video. And, you know, it is actually incredible for someone who is making speeches, who is on podcasts and so on, how hard it is to find any sort of artifacts of what he said. It's all kind of been scrubbed. But if we go back to it, does anyone know who followed this case? Remember the actual day Chair Bell predicted would be Doomsday. Do you remember that? Do you know whether that date is still ahead of us or whether it's come and gone? Answers in a moment. Now, one thing you'll notice from the presentation he did on preparing a people was he gave sort of his evidence of the world about to end. He showed a temple, I think in Houston, that was not underwater, but there was a sort of a flood around it. He showed an image of Kim Jong-il surrounded by nuclear missiles. He showed a picture of a house that was on fire. He showed an image of a large hurricane headed to Florida. And then, of course, he showed a picture of an eclipse. And what are all of these images geared to do? Well, it's to make you afraid. And he's now going to provide you with a solution to your fear, an escape from your anxiety, your fear of death.
And so what I see is from Brigham City to Santaquin, it's like a special plate of land that will never be destroyed.
Now, I have to say, the Doomsday Thing isn't a joke. The unfunniest part of it, I think, is how many people are actually hoping and praying that it actually comes sooner than later. They welcome these signs of disaster. In other words, people are wishing for the end times. What does that mean? They're wishing for death, wishing for famine, wishing for darkness, wishing for disaster, wishing for dystopia. Well, what happens when those wishes come true? Well, last night I went with some friends to watch the movie Civil War. I'm a big fan of Alex Garland's books. I love the beach so much. I actually went to the beach once upon a time. Make no mistake, it's the story of America's doomsday. Civil War is the story of America's doomsday. It's deeply, darkly dystopian. And because it's so raw and visceral, it's incredibly disturbing. Now, I want to talk about that in more detail, but if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do. Obviously, this case is called to me in a way, which is why I've gone to Ida, I've visited Rexburg, I've been in the court while Laurie Vella was on trial, and I've actually experienced a family member also sort of given over to this whole doomsday thing. So it really kind of strikes a chord, and not a very nice chord. So, you know, if you're finding this analysis worthwhile, insightful, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button and let's get started. So I want to kind of flesh out, I want to sort of illustrate the sort of terror and the whole sort of doomsday thing that I don't really think folks in true crime have really done very much. And just to kind of give a sense of the background fabric to the Laurie Vella case, to the Chair Bell case. And so the New York Times' Manola Dargis, she describes the film's raw power, Civil War, as such. She says, one thing that remains familiar amid these ruins is the movie's old-fashioned faith in journalism. And that also kind of strikes a chord with me because I consider myself a journalist of sorts, a photographer, a writer. At one point at night, alone in her bath in a hotel, Lee, a character in the story, she's a war photographer based probably on Lee Miller. She remembers a lifetime of horrors singed into 100 memory cards and blitzed through the planet's mainstream media. I thought I was sending a message home, don't do this, Lee says of this earlier work, but here we are. And I kind of feel like I feel the same thing, where in terms of the true crime community, I feel like I'm trying to warn against sort of believing in what you want to believe, believing in things because of shock value, not thinking critically, and where does that path lead at the end of the day?
Every time I survived the war zone, I thought I was sending a warning home. Don't do this. But here we are.
Yes, here we are. And the Chad Daybell trial is kind of a microcosm of, in a way, what's going on in America. There's certain people who believe certain things, other people who believe other things, and you better pay attention. Because part of what is so devastating about this film is how the journalists, while covering essentially the end of the world, basically the complete implosion of the world's greatest superpower into chaos and anarchy. I mean, you've got access to all the information that you need, and yet this is happening anyway, right? Meanwhile, the journalists basically do what journalists always do, gather footage. The process of storytelling, real-world storytelling, is that if you're not careful, you can become just as psychopathic as the stories you were representing, and supposedly silently, passively protesting against. And what you see in this movie is a sort of a green journalist coming onto the scene, and when you look again, totally addicted to what she's doing. It's like a power trip. You can see that with some YouTubers as well. It just they become so powerful in view of their followers. But to not oppose the stream of consciousness is to be a participant. To not oppose man's inhumanity to man is to go with the flow. Where do you think that flow is going to take us? According to the article in the Times, quote, the very premise of Garland's movie means that no matter what happens when or if Lee and the rest reach Washington, a happy ending is impossible, which makes this very tough going, doesn't it? And so what we're really talking about here, I certainly talk about in so many cases, people that commit murder who believe in fairy tales, and then you have this nightmare that is awakened. Well, what if we are all sort of collectively believing in fairy tales? Now, if you think about it, that's actually the premise of any doomsday prophet. The very nature of doomsday is an unhappy ending, to put it mildly. It's the unhappy ending of unhappy endings. It's the unhappiest ending of all. It's the final unhappy ending. The prophet, however, promises a fairy tale amidst the nightmare. He promises a reprieve. He promises an oasis of safety. Just trust in him. While the world burns, there's a nice little log cabin on a pretty little island where you and only you will be safe if you join us. Get your tickets now, sign here, and pay up. Incidentally, you kind of also have a similar thing with true crime communities. Get the truth from me. Only I know what really happened here. According to this article, quote, rarely have I seen a movie that made me so acutely uncomfortable or watched an actor's face that, like Dunst's, expressed a nation's soul sickness so vividly that it felt like an X-ray. Just listen to those words, a nation's soul sickness. What do you think is going on in the Chad Daybell trial? What do you think has been going on in the Laurie Vallow trial? It is expressing just a quadrant of that soul sickness. That soul sickness is very real, and we get a little sense of it being real through that. Now, I don't think it's spoiling the film to say Kirsten Dunst is, as a hardened war photographer, who has seen it all, she seems to realize the game is finally up for everyone. In the midst of the carnage and the dystopia, she seems to kind of have a epiphany. she seems to realize, wow, this is actually the end. It's the end for me. It's the end for everyone else, but they don't really realize it. And that, she also seems to think, despite all the hard-hitting storytelling in the world, Pulitzer Prize-winning photos, in spite of resilience and ideals, the world is lost. Going back to the article, quote, part of what makes the carnage here feel incessant and palpably realistic is that Garland, whose visual approach is generally unfussy, and I like to think mine is as well, doesn't embellish the violence, and I like to think I don't either, turning it into an ornament of its virtuosity. Instead, the violence is direct, at times shockingly casual and unsettling. So much so that its unpleasantness almost comes as a surprise.
Well, you're American, okay? Okay. What kind of American are you?
This unpleasantness is also true of the Daybell case. Not the not embellishing aspect, of course. We know about Tylee's murder being softened and symbolically rendered as the whimsical stalking and execution of an oversized raccoon. This coming from the cuddly, warm and fuzzy teddy bear prophet figure. But the violence in Laurie Vallow and Chad Daybell's orbit was certainly direct. It wasn't as if strangers were identified as zombies or enemies of the light. It wasn't as if they wanted to target dictators in foreign countries. In Laurie's case, she had 3 of her own family members killed, 3 out of 5, the survivors being Laurie herself and her eldest son, Colby. It's also possible that Laurie's brother, Alex, was scheduled for deletion as well. In the photo of Alex Cox standing with his 2 child victims in Yellowstone, we get a sense of how shockingly casual the slaughter was. We get the same sense from Laurie's sing-song giggly girl response to officers doing a welfare check and dodging the accusations by using a simple Darvo trick on them: deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender.
Just after my husband passed, I found emails and texts between them that they were planning all this stuff to get rid of me.
Do we need to worry about him coming over?
Well, that's when I'm moving back. I'm moving, and I'm not going to be in a place. I'm going to live with my friend, Melanie. Don't tell anybody her name, Dib, because I don't want anything in my name. I put the apartment in my name, but I've been staying over here with my brother because he protects me.
If you think about it, the whole Doomsday Thing is a ruse to deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. And the worst part of it is there are swarming millions out there who almost have Darvo as a default setting. Garland describes the reality of Doomsday as being a moment when the details become moot. It becomes about whether you survive or I do. It becomes us versus them. Obviously, we can avoid war, we can avoid doomsday, we can avoid conflict, but once we're in it, once we're at that point, well then all the arguments that led to it are moot. You can't have those arguments once you're at that point. Once we're in it, then might becomes right. Once we're in it, then the only way to survive is, I guess, to fight to survive. If you were a member of Chad and Laurie's Doomsday cult and if you were somewhat misinformed, it may have felt like a frightening countdown. Here's the answer to the question. Chad told his followers Doomsday was July 22nd, 2020, a date which reads 07/22/2020. If you were to gather in Rexburg, the King's Borough, with a great prophet, Chad obviously would chaperone you and house you in tents, right? You would gather while the rest of the world flowed away on lava and shimmering orange brimstone. And in a way you'd sort of feel, well, it's fine. I'm chosen, I'm special, so it's fine if all of that happens, as long as I'm fine. Really? Is it okay if civilizations collapse as long as you're fine? Also think about this. Think about the hypocrisy of the prophet prior to Chad's doomsday prediction. When Chad said a person had gone dark or turned into a zombie, that person in short shrift would die. One, then another, then another. I remember seeing on some podcast someone just saying so appropriately, so accurately, that Chad's problem was that he was struggling with his own insignificance. That was a big issue for him. And so, strangely, for someone who's so powerful and influential, Chad's own wife becomes a zombie. This means if his otherworldly calculus showed even those in Chad's most intimate circle going dark, this should tell you about Chad's actual spiritual clout when it came to those closest to him. I mean, if he's supposed to recruit these special people, why does he fail to be able to convert or to influence the people closest to him? And the same applies to Laurie. If you think the strategy by Chad Daybell of creating a following through both creating existential fear and then promising deliverance from it, manufacturing anxiety and a threat, and then presenting oneself as a savior and messiah from it, well, actually, it's a very old trick and one that stood the test of time. So, back to the original question. The Doomsday Cult, this one, or anyone, were their predictions reliable? Was the Doomsday Cult's predictions reliable? Believing something to be true, even when it isn't, is a funny way of becoming true. And I've heard somewhere that when prophets like this predict the end of the world and then it doesn't happen, curiously, the believers tend to become their beliefs become even stronger. Think about that as a recipe for craziness. We're at a dangerous point in human history right now where masses of people are casually toying with reality. You see it in true crime as well, where in the scenario of true crime, it's all a joke, it's entertaining. Let's roll our eyes as we look at what a murderer is saying about something. But you know what? Reality, like an atom bomb, isn't a toy. And playing with fantasies and fairy tales has a nasty habit of awakening real nightmares and monsters. And those monsters that are awakened, that enemy we are looking over our shoulder towards, is us. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.